Hello, this is Michael Vandervoort on Drive Through HR. I'm not going to read the formal script that Robin wrote because this is one of those impromptu episodes that I do with my buddy Jon Hyman in our labor relatedly format. We haven't done one since sometime last year, maybe pre-post election. I don't even know. I didn't look back. But we do these, we get together, we talk about labor relations, we talk about the law, we talk about Starbucks a lot, but I don't know if they'll come up today at some point. But anyway, today we're going to talk about all the changes that have been going on in the wide world of labor law under the new administration of President Trump. So Jon, great to see your face on Zoom. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you? It's been way too long.
I know I'm good. I mean, we were just talking about where travel's coming up and that kind of stuff, and it's been a busy first quarter. We actually, in our business, we actually had a record first quarter in terms of overall revenue for the lifetime of the company. So that was pretty amazing.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, great accomplishment. I'm sure my boss was happy about that because it's always good news kind of thing.
Yeah,
so
those are called good problems to have.
Yeah, and Phil Wilson, who is that said boss, also had a book launch on April 1st, and it hit #1 on Amazon. So I'm going to pimp that one time, I guess, and plug it, whatever you want to say. He's written a really great book, and we were helping promote it like crazy. And so lots of folks did that on leading up and back and forth. So that was fun. Never did that before. So I've had a few new experiences, even this deep into my career, but it's been a wild ride for the years. How about you? I know you write a lot about some of the stuff we're going to talk about, but you got your house remodeled. We talked about that in the pre-show. So that's a big...
Yeah, house is remodeled. My kid's coming home from her first year at college in a couple weeks. It's life, life here is good. And it's been busy here too. The legal practice has been, it's been a really busy first 4 months of the year. So I'm not going to complain about that either. So yeah, all in all, everything here in the wild world of Jon Hyman's life is A+ right now.
And plus spring is sprung in Cleveland and all. That's always a welcome respite after a cold winter.
Let's have my allergies, which is the one downside right now, but I'll do that.
Well, we'll try not to make your throat too sore. So since you've been writing about this a lot, I mean, we've got DEI, civil rights, we've got labor law, we've got the on and off status of Gwynn Wilcox at the board, we've got EEOC change, major direction changes. We can't cover all of this, but let's try to hit the high points. So you've been spending a lot more time online talking about these things, and I know you just did a webinar related to DEI for HR Acuity and Empower, I believe. So where do you want to jump into first, or you want to lay out the kind of the lay of the land for us?
Geez, I guess we can start with the DEI stuff. It's I've been writing online about labor and employment law for coming up on 20 years now, and every now and again an issue comes up where I feel like it needs to be kind of all consuming. And so during COVID, I wrote only about COVID. And so in the last few months, I've shifted my focus to kind of less on the daily updates of this circuit court just issued this decision on this case and here's what it means for your business. And I still do that, but I've been writing a lot more about kind of what's been going on inside the Trump administration and kind of what it means for our country, for democracy, for civil rights, for kind of the direction our country is headed in, which frankly sucks, right? So not to bury the lead. And so there's been a whole bunch of changes. DEI and the attack on DEI being one of the major ones, and it's coming from it's coming from one direction, but at a bunch of different targets. So you have the attacks on law firms for their internal DEI policies. You have the attacks on colleges and universities for their DEI policies and their DEI curricula. You have attacks on private sector businesses. You have attacks on hospitals and healthcare. So it's kind of attacking all different fronts in a coordinated effort to demonize, destroy, take down, and a DEI as a philosophy. Where I come down on it is just because the Trump administration says everything that falls under the umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion is illegal doesn't make it legally so. And so what's illegal are things like quotas and preferences in hiring. They were illegal on January 19. They were illegal on January 20, and they remain illegal today. And they were illegal all the way back to 1964 when Title VII was passed, and they'll remain illegal into the future. You can't consider race, sex, gender, margin, LGBTQ plus status, pick your protected class. You can't consider them when making a hiring decision. But that's not all the Trump administration is attacking. They're attacking really anything that tries to increase minority representation in businesses, that tries to make minorities feel welcome and like they belong once they get hired. Anything whatsoever that tries to level the playing field for someone within a protected class, they're attacking, but it doesn't make it illegal. And so I'm doing my best to try and educate people as to the difference between kind of illegal DEI, preferences and quotas, having like affinity groups, like exclusionary affinity groups. If you have an employee resource group or another affinity group focused on a protected group, like you have to have that open to everybody. You can't just say we're only blacks can join this black resource group, for example. So trying to let people know what illegal DEI is, and then so they can still carry forth the mission of inclusivity and diversity and equity within their businesses.
Last month, we had a labor relations forum meeting that we run a couple times a year. And we did an exercise, a tabletop exercise about DEI. It was simulated, like if you're a government contractor, you're dealing with this stuff. How do you deal with ERGs? Bunch of different things that we dialogued about. And it was fascinating to watch because not everybody is a government contractor. Not everybody's affected by the executive orders in equal manner. But to your point, it reaches far beyond government contractors because the policy administration and all that kind of stuff, you have to kind of think about holistically for every industry, whether you're a government contractor or not. We also talked about this as a potential organizing driver of union organizing, because as people maybe see the loss of certain protections and rights or privileges that they feel they've enjoyed in the workplace that weren't illegal, to your point, but now they're threatened, that may pivot them towards a union. So, there's no clear indicators of that just yet outside of like the government unions fighting for the government employees who are getting laid off and all that kind of stuff. That's not DEI direct. But I do think that's a factor that will come up over the long haul and as a new part in organizing.
Such an interesting point, and not to give the unions talking points, right? But the government's coming after your rights. Your employer doesn't care about your rights as a black person or a woman or a gay person or whatever, and organize with us, and we will we'll help write we will help write those rights into your agreement with your employer. And you look at, I think businesses are becoming polarized or stratified. I guess polarized is the right term, in terms of we support DEI or we don't support DEI. And so, I hold up kind of Costco and Target because they both operate in the retail space, and they're both really high profile examples of Costco has really dug in and said, yeah, we support DEI as a corporate mission and we're not backing away from that. And then you have Target that says, no, we're backing away from DEI. It's a corporate philosophy. And so it's very easy to see a union organizer coming in and saying to Target workers, for example, Target wants to take away your rights, we'll help get them back. I think that's a really compelling message for a union organizer to kind of hang their hat on.
It's real time, real life for sure. Yep. Brings to mind a voice that one of the people in my space, of labor relations space, who probably landed more on the side of the Trump administration in terms of philosophy and overall worldview. Peter List, a good friend of ours who passed away last week, way too young. Peter was somebody you could reach out to, didn't necessarily share agreement on political perspectives, but you could have a reasonable discussion with him about this type of stuff. And I have found myself, since he passed, like several times already, missing that voice.
I've had the exact same reaction. It was a gut punch when I heard the news. You texted me last week and said that Peter had passed away, and it was a real gut punch because Peter, he and I politically agreed on very little, and yet he and I could sit down for an hour or more and have really compelling conversations discussing our very different political and worldviews. And, by the end of the conversation, we still wouldn't agree on anything, but I would understand where he was coming from and he would understand where I was coming from. And he's he's emblematic of what's missing in our country these days, which is the ability to have a conversation over issues and try and find middle ground where middle ground exists. You can still be here and be here on the polls and still say, but we agree on X, Y, and Z, and let's focus on the agreement. And so it's a voice that is deeply missing. It's in our country right now. And yeah, and for a lot of reasons, it was a gut punch when I heard about Peter's passing.
Yeah, the work he did at Labor Union Report, reporting the daily news, was invaluable. And his podcast, Labor Union Radio, was one of the few places where he brought voice different. I don't want to say across the aisle because that wasn't really politicians, but he did his own version of that because it helped him learn and grow and develop his own thoughts. And I always learn from him, so I'm going to miss him. So I hope you rest in peace, Peter. I know it's weird to do this at a podcast, but it really is loss of a friend and a really useful voice in the labor relations space. So sad to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's jump because we can't dive deep on any of these things. I'm actually an AI voice. I'm diving deep while we delve into all the words are. Let's jump to the NLRB and agencies, I guess, right? So back when Biden took over, he fired Peter Robb. And so Jennifer Abruzzo, our friend Abruzzo, who we've talked about many times over the last 4 years, was ejected within, not day one as we thought, but within week one. She was ejected from her seat as the GC at the NLRB, but then Trump won up Biden, as he's prone to do, and took one step further and fired some seated Senate-approved members of the EEOC and the NLRB, basically putting both agencies at least temporarily out of business. And since then, there's been lawsuit after lawsuit and injunction and I don't know where. I think we're going to the Supreme Court. But right now, Gwen Wilcox has been off the board, on the board, off the board, on the board, and off the board again within about a 1 month period. Currently, she's sidelined and she's appealing to the Supreme Court to try to see if she can get her seat back. So that's been an interesting drama to watch. But in the meantime, the board doesn't have a quorum and they can only do so much. They also have a new acting GC in Bill Cowan, who's taken some interesting, he's removed many of Abruzzo's things, but he's holding the line on some of the things the board has ruled on that people thought he would overturn sooner. So it's been kind of an interesting dance at the NLRB, and we see similar activity at the EEOC. What's your take on all that?
It's interesting because while these agencies technically kind of exist under the umbrella of the executive branch, they are designed to be independent agencies that exist outside of the reach of executive power.
And politics to some extent.
And of politics, exactly. And it's by design because they're not supposed to. I've been hypercritical of the NLRB for kind of twisting in the political wind with their policies, from administration to administration. And, the only thing that employers can be certain on with the NLRB is that you can kind of gauge which way their policies are going to swing based on who's the person who's sitting in the Oval Office, whether they're going to be pro-union or pro-management. But that said, they're supposed to be extra political bodies. And here you have Trump clearly is using his political leverage to try and influence what these agencies are doing. The EEOC right now, for example, doesn't have a quorum. And so they can't, they can't issue guidance. They can't rescind existing guidance, and they can't issue new guidance. What they can do, however, and what Commissioner or Acting Commissioner Andrea Lucas can do, is direct the processing of charges and direct the filing of litigation. And so you have, for example, she put out a statement about transgender rights are. She falls into the who's the Harry Potter author whose name I'm blanking on.
J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, she falls in the J.K. Rowling's camp of her view of transgender people and transgender rights, and so she's very assertive in her pushing her beliefs on the status of transgender individuals within the U.S. And so she has the reports we've heard, and she's put out policy statements. It's not the official policy of the EEOC because the EEOC doesn't have a quorum, and so they can't issue official guidance. But she has put out statements saying that I don't think Title VII protects transgender individuals, despite the fact that the Supreme Court in the Bostock case says otherwise. the reports we're hearing from inside the EEOC is that she has directed the agency to stop processing discrimination charges in which a transgender individual is claiming sex discrimination. And so she's affecting policy without a quorum, even though there's no quorum to officially change change policy. And then the same at the NLRB with the rescission of numerous GC memos that were issued during the Biden administration. We see the same type of thing happening. So there's no quorum, but we're seeing the kind of the levers of power being flicked to the extent they can be without a quorum existing.
And then there are cases, there are employers who've had recent union elections that are on appeal. Objections had been filed and stuff, but the board can't rule on those. So both sides, the union and the company in this case, they're going to be hung out to dry on what's the status of that location pending election with objections potentially for years. So
it doesn't serve anybody's interest not to have a quorum.
Yeah, and yet they haven't even nominated anybody for the board at this point. Despite all the other stuff they've been doing, there's no nominees for the board. And the only way they get a quorum is if Wilcox manages to win at the Supreme Court reinstatement, which seems sketchy at best. Maybe, I don't know. I would say it does.
I mean, there is existing Supreme Court precedent from I think the 20s or 30s saying that Trump can't unilaterally fire the member of an independent agency board without just cause, but the Supreme Court also allowed the termination of the head of the consumer
PFCB or
whatever that acronym is. And so there's a real big question right now as to whether the Supreme Court will conclude that the firing of, board members and EEOC commissioners is legal. But it will significantly change the relationship between the executive branch and these agencies moving forward if an incoming president really literally has the authority to unilaterally terminate who they want to terminate.
Yeah. And I don't even want to get into tariffs and that. Other than from a labor perspective, so a couple things have been happening specifically in labor relations. Petitions and elections are down a little bit. Exactly how much that is, there seems to be some data. It seems like maybe the government cutbacks. It seems as if the DOGE efforts and some of the reductions or hiring freezes and stuff may be causing like some data entry stuff at the NLRB so that their database stuff the numbers. Like there seem to be tranches of election data being added in that weren't there a couple of weeks ago. We've noticed that a little bit. So right now, it's hard to get a specific read on what we have a database that tracks that stuff, but it's hard to get a specific read because the numbers are moving and it's I don't want to. The details of that aren't important. The point is elections are down. We're not quite certain how much at this point. It's somewhere between 6% and maybe 20%, depending on the day that you look at our tracking records. But it's come back up. However, in addition to just like some reduction in activity, the Teamsters, they got, what's her name, Marcus, the DOL, the Reimer, I can't remember her last name. She was supported by Sean O'Brien at the Teamsters, and they loved that she got in. The Teamsters have also come out in favor of some of the tariffs. UAW, which was notoriously bashing Trump prior to the election, supporting Harris. Now Sean Fain has come out and said, well, we need tariffs. So we're starting to see the labor movement have some split, whereas the government unions and the National Federation of Teachers and others are lining up to fight Trump's civil service changes. So there's a lot of distraction, not just for employers, but also for the labor side. And so we're seeing a bit of disruption in what's been a rising level of union organizing and ULP activity, maybe come to at least a temporary halt. I'm kind of wondering what you're seeing and hearing on your end.
Yeah, I honestly haven't heard a lot in that regard. I think the tariff thing, and again, I don't want to get too deep into the whole tariff issue, but that's an interesting one to me because by all accounts, if you really wanted to bring all manufacturing into the U.S., by the time you could ramp that up to the point of having meaningful, fully U.S. production of an automobile, that is all the parts, and everything, the steel, the parts, everything is made in the USA, Trump would likely be out of office by then. We could be past the 2028 election cycle. And so in all of that, and if the Democrats either take back the Congress in 2026 or win the White House back in 2028, tariffs are obviously going to disappear. And so, all that construction at that point, if you're actually going to start building factories to ramp up production to truly make a fully US made automobile, is going to go away. And so the tariff thing, to me, it's not as easy as saying, well, I'm going to put, 100% tariff on an automobile that's made outside of the US in order to generate manufacturing within the US, because you can't just flip a switch and start manufacturing made in the USA cars, because so many of the components are not made in the USA. And so I understand from a philosophical standpoint, I understand why, the Teamsters or the UAW might say, tariffs are good for us because they help generate U.S. manufacturing and help generate U.S. jobs, but it's not an overnight solution. So it's and I question whether it's a solution at all, because the courts are going to have their say on tariffs eventually in the near future, and the next administration will as well, or Congress at some point. So it's a fascinating issue.
Yeah, we're living in weird times. What else has been on your mind? I mean, like, there's so much. I don't know. What else has been on your mind, throughout all this?
The attack on law firms has been front and center in my mind. Obviously, my law firm is, knock on wood, too small to be on anyone's radar in the White House. But you've seen the administration go after some of the biggest law firms in the world based on their alignment with Democratic candidates or Democratic policies or Democratic issues, or backing Democratic lawsuits. So the going after lawyers for doing their job, to me, is highly troubling. After we get off this call, I'm going to go there. The Perkins Coie, which was kind of the first law firm that fell in Trump's target because of their involvement with the generation of the Steele dossier back during the 2016 election. The oral argument in the summary judgment motion is happening, and I think it's going to be the audio is going to be streamed online at 11 a.m. this morning. So I'm going to try to listen to that, because the going after lawyers for representing clients is highly scary to me. If you can chill the exercise of lawyers representing clients just because those clients might have an issue, take a position on an issue different than a position favored by the administration, like, the slope that takes you down scares the shit out of me. Because then is it, we're going to go after law firms that litigate Title VII cases, or we're going to go after law firms that represent undocumented workers, or we're going to go after law firms that represent Planned Parenthood or pro-choice organizations. The First Amendment protects the rights of individuals to hold viewpoints separate apart from government intervention or government efforts to chill those viewpoints. And this, to me, is a pretty clear First Amendment violation. And I really, really hope the courts and ultimately the Supreme Court sees it that way. Because if we can't represent the clients that want to use our services, the whole judicial system breaks down. And if the judicial system breaks down and lawyers won't represent clients who have viewpoints different from those held by the administration, then we have taken one giant step towards authoritarianism, which is where this country is, where it looks like where Trump wants to take this country.
The other piece of that same issue, or another piece that I have to admit, I don't fully understand what the settlement agreements equate to, but firms have been gone after. You met Perkins Coie, some of them are fighting, others have negotiated settlements by offering pro bono work to the White House, which, like, that strikes me as very, like, I don't know. I can't get my head around it, I guess. Like, what are they going to do?
It strikes me as extortion, but that's a different.
Well, yeah, but right. So, like, how, anyway, like, how do they work in hand with the Department of Justice? And to your point, then still, because now you've got, anyway, it seems, they're talking about using them for tariffs and immigration work and different things, so it's like, we're settling with these law firms and using them to help direct U.S. policy as like a freelance extension of the Department of Justice or something. Right. I think that's what it kind of seems like they're setting up. And I can't get my head around how that works.
Yeah, I've heard some people say, that the and I'm not a managing partner of any law firm, let alone, a big white shoe law firm in New York City. But I've heard some people suggest that the strategy here is just get Trump's attention off of you because he has the attention span of a gnat. And so if he forgets you're there, he'll move on to someone else, and then he's likely never to come back to putting his attention on you. And so do what you can to get his attention off of you, and then just go about your business, right? But by the same token, they are promising to give tens of millions of dollars of free legal services to the administration, which I suppose would make them a de facto arm of the Justice Department. And they're also really pissing off their employees who are not happy that these law firms are capitulating. And so these law firms there's been several high profile resignations, and I'm sure there's many more going on behind the scenes, but these law firms that are losing associates because they're capitulating to the wishes of the Trump administration. And so clearly what they're trying to do is scare, I think, clients from retaining these law firms. They're trying to say, don't retain Perkins Coie as your lawyers, because that's going to get you crossways with Trump.
You're now on the blacklist.
Right. Yeah, you're on that. You're right. You're on the blacklist, and you don't want to be on Trump's blacklist, and so don't do business with Perkins Coie. Take your legal work somewhere else, and trying to do that to drive these law firms, I think, out of business. Which again, if you're doing it because you disagree with the viewpoint that these law firms are espousing through the clients they're representing, or the litigation they're pursuing, or the matters they're handling, then how is that not a First Amendment violation? And we'll hear more about that, I think, in the oral argument this morning. But it's a big step towards the loosening of our grip on our democracy, right? Sending, you asked what else is on my mind, literally grabbing undocumented people off the streets and secreting them away to torture prisons in a foreign country without due process is horrific, right? And so, I've heard all kinds of arguments. Well, these people don't belong here anyway, and that's fine, but at least give them the due process they deserve before you export them from the country. And there is a huge glaring difference between deporting someone, that is having a hearing, giving them due process, concluding that they don't legally belong in the U.S., and then sending them back to the country they came from, of which I have no issue with at all, versus sending people to foreign prisons never to be heard from again without any due process and locking them up, presumably for the rest of their lives, when they've been convicted of no crime here or anywhere else, is horrific. And how anybody can defend that as a practice is beyond me. I just don't understand how any American citizen who believes in the Constitution, believes in our rule of law, believes in our democracy can defend that as a practice, no matter your position on immigration.
Yeah, that's lots of disturbing news of that sort. Remarkably little that we can do except stand by and wait to see if any sanity remains inside the different branches of the government.
Wait for the Democratic Party to have a collective backbone and actually stand up and do something.
Yeah, that also. Okay, I guess we could keep running down that rabbit hole for another year or so, but we don't have a year. You want to hear the Perkins Coie arguments? I've got to go pack to head to Charlotte. So I'm gonna call audible and say I think we've hit the end of the show, unless you have any last thoughts in general. That was a lot of not directly on point labor related stuff, but it all kind of ripples together right now into a big scary blur.
I'll tie it in a little bit to labor relations, although not really labor relations. There is power in collective action. We've seen protests, concerted, organized protests nationwide over the past couple of months. Keep doing that, because the more people get out in the streets and protest, I think the more likely we will see meaningful change down the road. And so there is real power in collective action, and I'd like to see that continue over the span of the next year, 2 years, 4 years, as we lead up to the next into the next election cycles.
All right. Well, it was great to catch up with you and talk some deep subjects. We'll do this again, hopefully sooner than later. But I'm going to go ahead and end the recording and say goodbye to you and let you get on to the next thing. Have a great weekend, John.
It's your next time labor relations stuff.
Yeah, your craft beer update. Yeah, well, there will be some stuff. It's just we're in a really big moment. We're coming up still on 100 days. It's unbelievable that it's not even been 100 days yet. That's coming like next week, I think. So we'll see. Anyway, have a great weekend. I'll talk to you soon, John.
Yeah, safe travels. Take care.
All right.